Hi everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the channel, and I'm here for a list video for you guys. Now, for this list video, I'm going to be talking about the band Trivium. Now, this is more of a subjective type video, I guess, since not everyone would technically agree with this. Some people might not like the band Trivium at all. But I'm gonna be giving you some reasons why I personally believe that Trivium could possibly be the greatest metal band of the 2000s. Now, of course, some people might say, well, what about this band or that band? Some people might say Korn or Slipknot are some of the greatest metal bands of the 2000s. But those are not 2000s bands. Remember that. We're talking about bands that didn't release music until the 2000s. Those bands that I just mentioned previously, those are bands that released albums in the 90s, of course. So yeah, let's go ahead and begin with this list of some reasons why perhaps Trivium could possibly be the best metal band of the 2000s. Now, the first one is the guitar work. Now, the guitar work I do think is really something else. Now, sure, I do think the guitar work in Trivium's discography has progressed for the better in their later albums, of course. Now, with the early stuff, with the early Trivium records, I think the guitar work is still really good, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's definitely really good stuff, but I do feel like that the guitar work has definitely significantly gotten better with the later albums, I think, So, yeah, the guitar work is definitely something to bring up here. I think the guitarists in this band, they really do a good job. So, the next reason I can think of is Matt Heafy's voice. Now, sure, I know that there's other vocalists in 2000s metal and metalcore that, have really fantastic vocalists. They have really fantastic voices, voices that are really unique and impressive and just really great to hear. Some other vocalists that come to mind would be Howard Jones, Jesse Leach, and Ryan Clark. Those are just a handful right there. But Matt Heafy's voice, I think he's got a really good voice. I think that he does a really good job at what he does. Now, I wouldn't say that his vocal ranges are mind-blowing, like as far as impressive goes, but they are really good still. I think he does a really good job at what he does. So, yeah, and I do think that Matt, again, like with the guitar work, I do think Matt Heafy's voice has gotten better with each Trivium album, I would say. Now, again, his vocals in the early Trivium albums, still good. Don't get me wrong, they're still solid. He definitely sounds great in the early Trivium albums, but it's quite impressive that, he's improved upon that in the later Trivium albums, specifically talking about Silence in the Snow, The Sin in the Sentence, and even What the Dead Men Say. And probably the new album that they have coming out in 2021, if that is when it's coming out, of course. So, yeah, Matt Heafy's voice, definitely something noteworthy about Trivium. So, let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. Now, the next thing is that they've never released a bad album. Now, some people might not agree on this one because I know that there's a lot of people that don't like Vengeance Falls or Silence in the Snow, but I think those albums are still really good. Sure, they're not some of their best, but I still think they're solid for what they are still. And it's quite impressive considering, the different grounds that they've stepped on, I guess, and they still managed to not release a bad album, but we'll get into more of that. But yeah, it's quite impressive that they've never released a bad album. And yeah, sure, there's other bands that have never released a bad album, but I don't know. I think it's really hard to pull off if you're a modern band. Like, if you're an early band or, a classic metal or a classic rock band, I think you have a better chance of never releasing a bad album. But I think it's quite impressive for a modern band or a 2000s band to never release a bad album. So that's what makes Trivium kind of exceptional in that way, I think. So yeah, they've never released a bad album, so that's a plus for sure. Now, like I said before, the next reason that I can think of why Trivium is perhaps the best metal band of the 2000s is they have diversity. It's not like all their albums sound the same. They're not like August Burns Red, where every album, you can't tell one from another, Like, you can tell, like, with each Trivium album, that they definitely each have something different to offer. Now, sure, some people might complain that Ember to Inferno and Ascendancy, which are the first two albums, are too similar, but I wouldn't even go as far to say that. I would say with Ascendancy, they just, improved and then matured in some ways and took some of the best things from Ember to Inferno and just made them better or whatever, That's how I would make that comparison, I guess. And then when they got to the Crusade, they became a little bit more thrash influenced. Same could be said about Shogun, which I still think to this day is their best work. And then with In Waves, I think In Waves is probably, one of their most metalcore sounding albums, if that makes sense. Vengeance Falls, they started to incorporate they started to add more of that thrash that they did with the Crusade, but kind of combine that with alternative metal and metalcore. It just works for them. And Silence in the Snow, I would say, is just kind of straightforward, clean vocals only metalcore or something, like it's like alternative metal, and I don't know, they combine a lot of different things. And with the Sin in the Sentence, they combine, they have metalcore, they have some thrash and even some progressive metal stuff in there, which is really cool. And same could be said about what the Dead Men Say. They kind of improved upon that, but bringing in some of Trivium's familiar sound, which I do like. So yeah, diversity, man. It's it's definitely strong with Trivium for sure. And sure, there are other bands that have diversity in 2000s metal. Demon Hunter is another band that comes to mind as far as 2000s metal bands that have a lot of diversity. Avenged Sevenfold is another band that comes to mind, but I don't know. Again, I think it is definitely exceptional with Trivium, since I feel like they probably experiment the most out of most 2000s metalcore bands, at least to my knowledge, and out of all the metal bands of the 2000s that I'm aware of and that I have heard. So the fact that they have a lot of diversity, that's a good thing. And they can experiment, and again, still manage to not release a bad album. That's impressive. So the last and final thing that I do want to bring up for this video to why Trivium could possibly be the best metal band of the 2000s is the fact that they're heavily influenced by early metal. Now, this is something that I'm sure some people might take as a negative, like, what? Like, that's a reason? Like, you got to give me a better reason than that, Because obviously, the people that would say that are, people that are close to my age that are like, well, who needs early metal, Now, here's something I want to bring up. I think about bands like Fit for a King and how they're influenced by bands like As I Lay Dying. Now, As I Lay Dying, I think is a great band. I think they're one of the best bands in metalcore. But I don't think that they're exactly the bands that you want to be influenced by if you're just now starting a metal band or a metalcore band or whatever, like, I feel like that there needs to be more bands influenced by early metal, metal from the 70s, the 80s, and even the 90s to some extent, and that's one of the things I got to really give credit where credit is due for Trivium, obviously with albums like The Crusade and Shogun, they're expressing their influence from thrash metal like Metallica and Megadeth, and I think it really shows. And some people might not like that about The Crusade and Shogun. I know there's some people that don't like The Crusade and Shogun because they're, too thrash for them or something, like they prefer their metalcore stuff or whatever, or the stuff that's more metalcore aimed, I guess. But obviously there's a lack of appreciation going on there, and I know a lot of people would personally agree with me that Shogun is one of their best albums for sure. And I love that it's thrash influenced, and there's even a lot of new wave metal that's being influenced into some of Trivium's work as well. So yeah, that's definitely something worth pointing out. And yeah, I think that there needs to be more bands today that are influenced by early metal. And you got to think about this as well. There's even some metalheads that are in their 40s and their 50s that like Trivium. And you know why that is? Is because they're so heavily influenced by early metal. Maybe some of these metalheads, these older metalheads, the metalheads that are, from generation ago or something are, you know, having an easier time getting into Trivium. Maybe they have an easier time appreciating Trivium because they can see how, you know, Trivium, I can understand why people would say are a band that's pushing the metal genre further, because they're taking a lot of what worked in a lot of early metal, you know? And I think, well, I mean, coming from a biased standpoint, I think a lot of early metal is better than a lot of today's metal in general. But you can see how this is definitely something that plays a factor for sure. I just really dig the fact that Trivium is heavily influenced by early metal, because I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of metal bands today that I listen to that, you know, they're considered metal bands, but do you really actually feel like you're listening to a metal band? You know, but with Trivium, like, you can listen to them and think, I'm actually listening to a metal band, because they really do feel metal influenced. You know, they're not like super hardcore influenced like a lot of today's bands are, you know? So the fact that they're influenced by 80s metal and thrash metal and all kinds of classic styles of metal is definitely a plus, especially for someone like me. Now, again, some people might not be on board with that. Some people might think, well, you know, they don't care about that because all they care about is today's metal. But those are just people that are missing out massive big time. So the fact that Trivium is heavily influenced by older metal is definitely something that I can see being a huge factor to why Trivium could possibly be one of the greatest, if not the best metal band of the 2000s. So there you have it, guys. That is my list of reasons why Trivium could possibly be the best metal band of the 2000s. So let me know what you guys think. Are there any more reasons? Feel free to let me know in the comments. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Have a nice day and take care.